There were a ton of good signings in free agency, and none were better than the Russell Wilson signing, where he signed for a veteran minimum contract, which for an average quarterback is just stupid good value. This only worked because any amount paid by the Steelers would be deducted from what Denver would be paying him for this year. So this was great capitalization by the Steelers. For comparison, Russ was a bit better than Baker Mayfield this year, in my opinion, yet Mayfield secured over $30 million more per year than Wilson did. Sticking with the Steelers, Deshun Elliott is another steal for them, as he signed a 2-year, about $3 million per year contract. That is just an absolute steal for a high-end safety. Elliott ranked 36 out of 95 safeties this year in PFF grade, and he has had 2 other years in that area as well. So he is very consistent in his play, which is great for a guy that is cheap. You want to see multiple years of production for any guy you bring in, but especially when they're cheap, you're thinking they're going to be kind of iffy year to year. But no, Elliott is surprisingly consistent, and that is really going to bode nicely for the Steelers secondary. What's best about the move, though, is that it allows Minkah Fitzpatrick to play more as a coverage safety, as Elliott is a great run defender, ranking 9 out of 92 safeties in PFF grade in run defense. So Fitzpatrick can play his more natural, best position, the most valuable position for him, and be a coverage defender, whereas Elliott is going to be kind of more in the box and doing things at the line of scrimmage. So they play so nicely off of each other. Sticking with the Steelers, they made a move that I think actually benefited the other team in the Deontay Johnson-Dante Jackson trade, which is a bit of a tongue twister. The trade was basically Deontay Johnson for Dante Jackson straight up, which really favored the Panthers in my opinion, because Deontay Johnson is a top 25 or so wide receiver in this league. He's hovered around 1,000 yards in the past 3 seasons, or at least been on pace for them in the past 3 seasons, with really poor quarterback play in that span. And Dante Jackson in the past 3 years, his best PFF rank is 63 out of 127. So he's about average at his best, and Johnson can be a legit number 1 wide receiver. I love this move for Carolina. I think they get a legitimate number 1 wide receiver, and they didn't have to give up any of their limited resources on the offensive side. They didn't really give up any draft picks either. So I think this is a really good move for them. They can give Bryce Young a fairer evaluation now, and with the moves they made on the offensive line as well, things are starting to come together. But especially now with the weapons, you have a legit number 1 wide receiver, which is a really hard thing to get in this league. And you basically had to give up an average level player for Johnson. So I like this move a lot for the Panthers. Moving to the NFC South now, Kirk Cousins is a great addition for the Falcons. You might be thinking to yourself, $45 million a year for a quarterback is pretty up there, but that's kind of the going rate for a top 10-ish quarterback, and that's what he is. I had him ranked as the 8th best quarterback in the league before getting hurt, but more than just his great play too. The reason this is such a good deal for Atlanta is it gives them a legitimate title contention and an open NFC. Before this move, they were kind of a middling team without much of a direction. Now they have a real legitimate shot at competing for a Super Bowl, which is more than you could say for any NFC South team in recent memory. Jonathan Grenard is the next sneaky good deal, as he signs for 4 years, $19 million per year with $42 million in guarantees. So he signs a pretty luxurious contract, but it's a much better contract than the Danielle Hunter at 2 years, $24.5 million per year, with all of it but $1 million guaranteed. The reason Grenard is a much better contract is because Grenard is 3 years younger than Hunter is, and he's just as good, with Hunter and Grenard both having 78 PFF grades this past season, showing that there's not really an advantage to one or over the other. Grenard is a much better run defender, which closes the gap because Hunter is a little bit of a better pass rusher, which, yes, pass rush is more valuable, but you're not going to be able to pass rush as an every down defender if you're getting blown off the ball in run defense, which is something that can happen with Hunter because he's not the most physical in the run game. Moving to a cornerback now, Kendall Fuller is a great deal for Miami at 2 years, $8.3 million per year. The Dolphins majorly upgrade from Xavier Howard at a much reduced rate nonetheless, as Fuller ranked 6th in PFF grade and Howard ranked 107th. So they really, truly upgrade at corner. And they get some increased versatility as well, as Fuller could be a nickel corner as well or play outside. As he ages, he could even be a safety as well, but that's more down the road. Either way, Fuller is a great addition. Sticking with defensive backs, we have Cameron Curl, who at 2 years, $4.5 million per year, is one of the bigger steals of the offseason. He's one of the most underrated players in the league, and he's being paid as such, as well as Curl ranked 53rd out of 101 safeties in PFF grades. But he gets signed on a very modest sort of replacement level player contract, which is just not what he is. Being average is a lot better than being what you can get as a replacement level player, because even though you might think replacement level and average are about the same thing, they truly are not. There is multiple tier gaps between being a replacement level guy and being average, and Curl is a little bit above average for most of his career. At the very least, he's going to be average, which is very valuable for defensive backs. You're only as good as your weakest link, and if you're average at your weakest link, that's a great deal. So I really like the Curl signing for the Rams. I think this is one of the better ones in all of the offseason. Another deal for the NFC West is Leonard Williams at 3 years, $21.5 million per year, which is definitely up there. Again, it's great value, though, because he's similarly skilled to Christian Wilkins, and Wilkins went for over $6 million more per year. Williams was 11th in pressures with 54, and Wilkins was 9th with 58. Granted, Williams played an extra game. It shows they're in the same ballpark. And moreover, for run defense as well, they're both very solid run defenders, with Williams having 34 stops and Wilkins having 33, which again, Williams did play that extra game, so it's not necessarily showing that he's a better run defender than Wilkins. And to clarify with stops too, that's any tackle that is disadvantageous for the offense. So it might be a 1 yard gain on, say, 3rd and 5, or a 3 yard gain, all the same on 3rd and 5. It's anything that is going to be disadvantageous, though, for the offense. So those are those sort of splash plays at the line of scrimmage for Leonard Williams. He does great in run defense, making those tackles. Moving now to the AFC South, Calvin Ridley is a move I really like for the Titans. This one kind of came out of nowhere as well. It's 4 years, $23 million per year. The contract itself is about the going rate for a legitimate number one wide receiver, but this deal is so good because Tennessee was completely devoid of wide receiving talent aside for DeAndre Hopkins, and now Will Levis will have enough weapons to actually be evaluated, even if the offensive line remains a big issue. But the nice thing is the Titans have that high draft pick in this year's upcoming draft, so they'll be able to hopefully get an offensive lineman either in the first or in the second, because this is a deep tackle class. They can get rid of Nicholas Petit-Frere in one of these rounds, and they'll get a pretty sizable upgrade from it as well, because Frere is not very good, and that's putting it lightly. He has really struggled at the NFL level, and you could bring in Joe Alt perhaps in the first round, which would be a really good addition. You could bring in any number of players in the second round perhaps. Either way, they have options, and that's really given to them by the fact that they signed Calvin Ridley, because they would also need receiving talent had they not signed Ridley. So there's just going to be no way to fill all of their needs in one off season had they not made this one move, which I think is really good, even if the value isn't necessarily eye popping. It's just a good move that helps the team down the line. Another move that I really like is Xavier Mckin at 4 years, 17 million per year. You might be again thinking to yourself, that's a large deal. But though it is, his contract is only the 8th highest for a strong safety, and he is much more than just a box safety. McKinney ranked 4th out of 101 safeties in PFF grade, so that alone is a huge steal. But what is really nice is the fact that McKinney is so versatile. He can play at the line of scrimmage, he can play deep off the ball, he can do anything, and that's exactly what the Packers needed. They didn't really have a do-it-all safety, and now they do, and that just really opens up so many things for their defense. They can play those disguised coverages where it's a cover 2, but it looks like a cover 3, or McKinney can just play in the box and be dominant there. Either way, he's signed for a very minimal contract and is a fantastic player. Speaking of minimum contracts too, Marquise Hollywood Brown at 1 year, 11 million is one of the bigger steals of the offseason. Brown's real value is about 2 times what he got, because he's not quite as good as Calvin Ridley, but he's not far off either. So, yeah, it's about twice that $11 million. And Brown is exactly what Kansas City needed, as he's a legit outside receiver that can take the top off of defenses, which opens up things underneath for Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce. The Chiefs are just going to be a major headache to stop now. They were already difficult, and that was with Marquez Valdes-Scantling being their only sort of deep threat, which it's kind of hard to call him a threat. He was more of a threat to drop the ball than he was to get open, but I digress on that. Hollywood Brown is a fantastic, fantastic move for the Chiefs. And though Brown disappointed a bit this year with just 41 yards per game, last year he was on pace for 1,000 yards, and the year before that, he achieved 1,000 yards in a run-heavy Baltimore offense. So he has had production, and he hasn't had Patrick Mahomes yet, even if Lamar Jackson is not too far off either as a player. Sticking with AFC threats to win the Super Bowl, AJ Epinesa returning to the Bills on a 2-year, $6 million per year contract is fantastic value for the Bills. Epinesa was 25th in PFF grade and is making at most the 39th most for a defensive end. That is a budget deal for Buffalo, which is exactly what they needed because they're pretty cap strapped. And this is really helpful for them as well because they didn't have the greatest edge room. Now they get a versatile piece back in the rotation that can mitigate the Von Miller disaster that has existed to this point, because Miller just has not been the same player he once was. Epinesa can sort of fill in for Von Miller and hopefully get Miller back on the right path, as Epinesa can take some snaps off of Miller's plate, allowing Miller to have a full tank of oxygen when he's out there. So I think this is a good move for the Bills. Another move I like, again, for an AFC contender, is Gino Stone to the Bengals. 2 years, $7.5 million per year. That is light money for a very good safety. Stone was 25 out of 95 safeties, but again, he's getting that like second or even third tier money for a safety. He is a premier cover guy though, and he struggles a bit in the run game, I'm not going to lie. But I'll take a guy that can cover all day at an elite level, and that is exactly what Stone is. Going back to the Ravens now, Derrick Henry is a move I really like at 2 years, $8 million per year. Henry is 30. That is a terrifying number for a normal running back. But Henry is not a normal running back. He's the best running back of this generation, and that's something you like to bet on, especially because he hasn't shown signs of slowing down. He's ranked 3rd in PFF grade, which is much more meaningful than his raw counting numbers in my eyes. But even those are still good. He had the average of 4.2 yards per carry, which is, again, like just exactly average for running backs, behind a pretty poor offensive line in the Titans and a system that really wasn't doing him any favors either. It was kind of blatant that it was going to be running because they just didn't really have threats, again, aside for DeAndre Hopkins, and Will Levis was figuring things out. So he's going to go to an offense that will be a lot more wide open, and I think it's going to be a lot more conducive to his success. So I think this is a really good move. If you still have reservations, though, and think $8 million is just too much for a running back nowadays, Zach Moss ranked 46 out of 63 running backs and makes $4 million. Henry should be worth an extra $4 million, and I think he definitely is. Going now to the Vikings, again, for an edge rusher for them, Andrew Van Ginkel on 2 years, $10 million per year is an absolute steal. Van Ginkel was quietly an elite edge rusher this year, having a rotational role for much of the year, and still finishing with 53 pressures, which ranked 29th among all edges. 10 million is just kind of chump change again for an edge rusher these days. And this was a great get in basically every way for Minnesota, especially after they lost Danielle Hunter. They replenished the edge room and then some with Grenard and Van Ginkel. So their defense is actually looking pretty up now, especially in the front seven. They have 2 great edge rushers, and they're also going to have another player down the line in this video as well, so stay tuned for that. Another move, though, I liked for an edge rusher is Zervas Smith. He signed for 2 years, $11.5 million per year. Much like with Van Ginkel, he makes less than that $20 million, which is kind of the cutoff for edge rushers these days. If you're making more than 20, you're really making high-end money. If you're making less than that, I think you're kind of a budget find. And that's definitely the case with Zervas Smith. He got about half that $20 million. And Smith is a great edge rusher. He's a top 5 edge rusher number 2 in the league. And he ranked 20th in pressures while he missed a game as well this year. So I think this is a really good find for the Browns, keeping him in the rotation. I'm honestly surprised he signed for as little as he did. I think he is a very good player. And he also gives a lot of versatility. He can be someone who lines up in the A gap, like a linebacker on a sugar blitz, which is where they're just kind of directly over the center if you aren't familiar. He can be a traditional edge rusher. He's very versatile. And I think the Browns really got a good one with him. Another move I like, though, Gabe Davis at 3 years, $13 million per year. Great value for a legitimate deep threat. Davis ranked 6th in yards per reception and finished with 746 yards on a year as a sort of 3rd/2nd/4th. That's why I kind of say 3rd option for Buffalo. It's sort of in between. Don't judge me for that. Things were murky for the Bills, so it's hard to really say what the hierarchy was for their weapons. Davis, though, really a good deep threat. Jacksonville gets a great deep threat that is very much so needed for them because they can complement Christian Kirk in the intermediate area, which is something that Calvin Ridley just did not do. He was also an intermediate threat, not so much of a deep threat guy. So this is a different skill set that should really add on to what the Jags are trying to do. And I think with Trevor Lawrence's arm, this is going to be a neat, very interesting duo to watch for years to come. One of the biggest steals of this offseason, though, perhaps the biggest offseason defensive underpay is Josh Uche at 1 year, $3 million. Uche is a great pass rusher, has a fun name as well. That's got to count for something. He ranked 58th out of 122 edges and pressures, so it doesn't sound like the greatest, but the year before he was even better. And Uche this year, though, still very solid and is worth at least comfortably 3 times what he got. He is a designated pass rusher for the most part, can't really be out there in the rundowns, but he can get after the quarterback, and that is something that is super valuable these days. I do not understand how he only signed for $3 million per year. I guess $3 million for just the year, but you get the deal. Another guy, I don't really understand how he signed for as little as he did. Aaron Brewer, 3 years, $7 million for him. He is probably the lightest offensive lineman you'll see in the NFL at 275 pounds. So he does have, relatedly, some issues as a pass protector against the strong defensive interiors. And he's also going to struggle to really move guys in the run game if they're really hunkered down. But he moves about as well as any offensive lineman in the league, as you would expect for a guy that's on the lighter side like that. And that's huge in Miami's wide zone scheme that asks for a lot of movement skills in their offensive line. Brewer ranked 11 out of 36 centers in PFF grade, so he is definitively above average. And he's signing again for, about a third of what a good interior offensive lineman is going to go for these days. So that is a really good find for Miami. Another good offensive lineman find, Ezra Cleveland at 3 years, $9.5 million per year. Cleveland ranked 38th out of 79 guards, according to PFF, and he is getting paid roughly half as much as the top tier guards are. That's a great deal for Jacksonville. I would much rather pay him that about $10 million per year than I would rather pay Robert Hunt $20 million per year. That's not to say that the Robert Hunt deal is a bad contract, because first of all, if you're the Panthers, you kind of have to overpay because you are the worst team in the league. And secondly, you're getting a really good player still. But I just like this move a bit more for Cleveland because it just doesn't leave you strung out any amount. $10 million is very affordable. You're not going to be in panic if he gets injured for any amount of time. Whereas with Hunt, you need him to play every single game or you're going to be missing out on a ton of money. And that's why I like this Cleveland deal a little bit more than those Hunt type of contracts. As I mentioned before, too, with Minnesota getting another addition, Blake Cashman is a great deal at 3 years, $8.5 million per year. It's a very under-the-radar move for them. They get a guy that was 5th in PFF linebacker grade this year, so he was elite, and he's only been healthy, though, for 2 out of his 5 years in the league. But when he does play, he might just be elite at everything. He can tackle, he can play coverage, he can thump in the run game, he's super athletic. There's nothing he can't do. And I really like this move for Minnesota. They've shored up their front seven in a tremendous way. But one thing is, they did not shore up as much as the Cincinnati Bengals did on the offensive line. Trent Brown at 1 year, $4.8 million is perhaps the second biggest steal of this offseason, second only to the Wilson signing for the minimum contract, which you just have to accept. A guy on an average deal or an average play signing for the minimum is just bonkers value. Trent Brown, though, he is an absolute steal as well. He is a very quality tackle, ranking 11 out of 81 tackles in PFF grade, and he's being paid like he's a freaking swing tackle. I do not understand this one bit. I think he's comfortably worth, again, triple, maybe 4 times as much as he's getting paid. I think this is such a fantastic deal for the Bengals. He should fire his agent if this is the best he can do, because Trent Brown is a great player. and he is not being paid like it. Maybe he took a fantastic downgrade in pay to play with Joe Burrow, which that would sort of make sense to me. But even still, the amount he took is so different from what he is worth. And if you're an AFC North fan, aside from a Cincinnati fan, you should be riled up over this one. This is really a big underpay, and that is really going to change the landscape of the league if he's able to stay healthy, and the rest of the Bengals are as well. Those are my thoughts on the best offseason moves. Be sure to let me know what yours are. Also, be sure to like and subscribe for more NFL content.